On this episode of the O2 Garage, I'm up a little bit past my bedtime, but don't worry, I'm playing with Ruby's Dodge. Alright guys, well the build is about to commence on Ruby's truck. We're now up here in Port Augusta, and as you can see behind me, it's offloaded and it's in place. So let's take a tour and I'll tell you exactly what the next steps are going to be. Alright, first and foremost, the tour starts right here with these steps. The steps were actually underneath the truck. I've already taken them off. So you can see that's been done. The seat's been taken out on the far side over there. And at the moment, the cab is actually just sitting on here loosely. This is actually not connected to the cab. In fact, you can see it sitting on the chassis right there. So what has to happen is that has to be connected at the back. Now inside, nice and easy. Look at all the garbage that's in there. Lots of bits and pieces that need to be cleaned out. We've got to get all that cleaned out and sorted. Now, you'll also notice something else on the cab. This gearbox is actually the wrong gearbox, because you can see it's hitting the firewall up here. So this whole gearbox unit has to be actually taken out. I'll have to take that cover plate off, I think, to get the gear shifter off, because that's sitting on the bottom of the cross member. Now, up the front here, we've got that all awesome looking 313 Poly V8 sitting in there. I'd really like to keep this engine, but change the gearbox. And you can see if we have a look in the back here, the gearbox mount doesn't line up. You can see it's hitting up the top up here. It's all wrong. So the reality of it is we're going to have to take the engine out. We're going to have to take the gearbox out, and we're going to have to get it all cleaned up as well. And when I say cleaned up, you can have a look in here and see we've got to get all that sorted out as well. Then we can actually connect correctly the bottom engine mount, bottom body mount off the cab, because the cab bolts down here are currently in place, but they're not actually the right bolts. So as you can see, we've got a bit of work to do. So as you can see, we now have got the engine and gearbox out of the Dodge, and the next step is going to be to separate this gearbox from this 313 Poly, because this is not the right gearbox for this chassis. I do have another gearbox, and we need to see if it goes on the back of this motor, otherwise we can't use the V8 in the truck. We'll have to go 6-cylinder, which is not a bad thing, but ideally V8 is the way we want to go. What I have just worked out is that this gearbox actually has two pieces. It has the bell housing and the actual gearbox itself. These bolts down the side here bolt onto the bell housing, which bolts onto the engine. So what actually has to happen is I need to take the gearbox off, then take the bell housing off. So that's the plan of attack now. There's the hole it was all sitting in. Now we just have that, which is a 313 Poly. And ideally we want to use the V8 in the truck if we can. Now, the clutch and the pressure plate on the back, don't worry about that. We're going to get that rebuilt if we choose to use it, because ideally I'd love to keep the V8 in this, because I know it fits, I know it'll work, and I also know the soundtrack's pretty good. But follow me, because the issue we have is actually the gearbox, because if we don't use the right gearbox, we end up not being able to fit it in there. So right now what we have to look at is what we have over here. You can see the issues we have. This is the current Poly V8 box, and it has a completely different setup on the back of the gearbox as opposed to what we have over here, which is the 6-cylinder back end. Now, a couple of things. This obviously has a rear extension housing. It's got bolts, very similar if you look in there to that. So I might be able to swap the back half of this for this unit right here. We also might be able to swap the front input shaft, because you can see that's a much more bigger, robust input shaft for this guy right here. Now, power-wise and so forth, it doesn't really matter, because it's only going to be a little street cruiser truck. And the 313 Poly is not really going to put out a huge amount of power. Certainly nowhere near anything that a gearbox that 245 had on it. So What I'm thinking is, with a little bit of creative license, I might actually be able to just chop and change these gearboxes and get one of them to work. Because I really want that V8. I really want that V8. Okay guys, well here is our Chrysler Poly motor taken out of the 4-ton truck. We've got it all the way up here now, ready to go. Gearboxes off the back, and we've got it stripped down, ready to find out what's going on with this one. This is what they call a Chrysler A Poly. Polyspherical heads. Very different to the hemispherical heads that all the drag cars have, but it is a big heavy motor made out of cast iron, made in the 50s and 60s and used in a wide variety of vehicles. It was a replacement for what they called the flathead V8s, and then it was replaced after that with what they call the LA block V8s, 318s, 340s, 273s and also 360s. Now this particular motor here came out with about 240, 290 horsepower, lots of torque, ideally suited for commercial vehicles. So that's why they dropped them in. Remember, they didn't have diesel turbos back then, so this was the go-to power plant. Now, why are we using this particular motor? Well, I'll give you an example as to why. This came with a 6-cylinder. Now, the 6-cylinder you've seen, I painted it blue, got it all ready to go, and then I realised it had a rear main seal leak, it had a front seal leak. I broke off no less than 5 studs from the water pump when I was trying to change that, plus a whole lot of other things. And the reality of it is, it was only ever going to be a 6-cylinder. Sure, it runs great, sitting over there in the shed, and if we need it, we can pull it out. But we do have the V8. Now, the V8 gives us that lovely V8 rumble. We all know what it sounds like. We know you can get race cars. We know you can make thousands of horsepower. But the reality of it is, in a cool rat rod street truck like this one, this Poly V8, if it's a good motor, will give us the soundtrack we need for that thing to go from being good to being great. Let's have a look at the motor. Now, if you look closely at a V8 motor like this one, something that was original and used, if you walk around it, it will actually tell you a story. And when I say it tells you a story, we never had this engine running. We have been told that it does run, but we don't know anything about it. We don't know about the compression. We don't know about the firing. We know nothing. But if you look closely at it, the car people out there would start to go, hey, hang on a second, it's telling a story. So let's start with the story. Have you noticed that all the paintwork is quite original? Have you noticed also that the heads don't appear to, I mean, you never really know, but it doesn't really appear to be taken off. Probably one of the only things that I can find on this motor that looks like it's been replaced is maybe that Welsh plug right there. But notice how the bottom end here, where the sump meets the block, it's just sweating oil. It's not leaking or pouring oil out. There's no real mainstream leaks on it. And even when you have a look at the top of the motor here, where that air cleaner used to sit right here, you can see it's just got mainly dirt around here. It's no oil. When we come around the back by the distributor here, you can see there's a bit of oil sweating there. And even when we have a look in through the main seal down there, look at that. Still looks really clean down there. You can see here, this is really just oil sweat. It's not really a mainstream leak. Come on this side and you can have a bit of a look where it joins onto the block, the sump down there. There's no real leaks that are going to be major issues. A couple of cobwebs. Around the front, we've got that fuel pump that looks pretty standard as well. The reality of it is, when you have a good look at this motor, it's showing you all the signs that it's very original and hasn't done a huge amount of kilometres. Okay, so we've had a big success here with our gearboxes. This is the 6-cylinder gearbox, and that is the V8 box. Now, the V8 box won't go in purely because you can see the back of the box has got this drum brake, handbrake assembly where the tail shaft joins in. Whereas with the normal gearbox here off of the 6-cylinder, we have that tail shaft which suits that chassis. So that's been a huge win. And now, in doing so, I also had to change one part at the front here, which is this input shaft. The input shaft is a lot thicker on the V8 one, so I've pulled it off of there, I've popped it onto the 6-cylinder one, and this is now ready to go in. But wait, because the hits keep on coming. I managed to pull the clutch off the back of the Poly because I really want to use that V8 motor. Now, this is going to be a little bit dark, but let me bring in here and show you what's going on. Okay, so here is our Poly V8 motor, and I've taken the back cover plate and the friction disc off the back. And I don't know if you can have a look down here, but you can tell it was a farm truck. Look at all the garbage that's sitting inside here. Look at all this. That's just all dust from out in the field. disgusting. Let me show you the clutch. It seems we might have struck pay dirt because the clutch itself looks really good, and it's also a modern style clutch. You can see it's got the springs in here. So this clutch has got organic material on it, literally organic material. Have a look at this stuff here, but it is a sprung clutch. Now, the other way you can tell whether a clutch is reasonably new is looking at the cover plate on, so the machine side of the cover plate, and you can actually see the machine marks. Even though there's that black line in the middle, the machine marks are still on that cover plate. So I've got a feeling that this is a reasonably new cover plate and disc. And if that's the case, that's going to save us a bit of money. We're going to put that back in. Obviously, I'm going to get this crap out of here that is wedged. Oh my God, that is unbelievable. So we'll get all that crap out, get that sorted. Well, as you can see, the engine's ready to go. We have steam cleaned it, we have also hit it with a wire wheel, and it's now ready to paint, which is where I've got these three things right here to use to paint an engine. And you kind of go, I know what this one is, but what are the other two? Alfoil and Vaseline. Yes, that's right, Vaseline. I'll show you the trick for using this in a moment. But right now, we'll use the tape to tape up what we can. We'll use the alfoil. The reason being, it's really easy to conform around different shapes, really weird shapes, and then we're going to hit it with some paint. One of the parts of the engine I don't want to paint is this face here. This actually is where the water neck sits on. So in order to get a really nice paint on it, I'm going to use some of this, which is obviously a bit of Vaseline. The reason I'm going to use this is because the paint will actually stick to the Vaseline. It won't stick to the metal surface. And what it will also do is give me a really nice painted finish all the way around the edge of this. It's a nice little trick I've learnt a few times, and certainly is really easy to keep the paint at bay. So let's get this little bit done here, and then we can drop some paint on it. In fact, while I'm at it, I might even just do a bit over this guy here, just to ensure we don't get any paint where the hose goes as well. Smart thinking, Jace. You are a brilliant man. Now it's the turn of the distributor, and as you can see with the distributor, it's a bit of an odd shape, and it's going to be a bit of a tough one to actually get masked up. So instead of doing that, we're going to use some of this, which is alfoil. And another really cool trick, if you know how to use this, can actually work really well in your favour. Now watch how this really does mould to the shape that it is actually going to protect. Have a look at this. I love this trick. You could not mask this any better than what I'm putting on now. It really does meet the requirement, and you can chuck on a stack of this stuff as well. It doesn't have to be one sort of hit. You can do a couple of hits because you crush it to the shape of what you are protecting. Brilliant. Okay, so the engine is completely masked up, ready to go. Our foil's on, and we're ready to paint. And this is the colour we're going to go. Duplo high heat with ceramic blue, like a royal blue, so that the engine will contrast against the engine bay, which is going to be red. So I think it's going to be a combination. It's going to pop. We'll put a nice air cleaner on top, and maybe a nice looking factory decal, and finish it out with a few little bits and pieces, maybe like some braided hose and stuff like that. But the big thing to remember is this is an unknown motor. So let's make it look pretty, and then we'll see if we can make it run. Have a look at the end result. How good does that look? That is exactly the color we were looking for, and it really, really has come up nicely. I'm really happy with that. All right, now what we have to do is unwrap the present. So with the engine now painted and back together with the gearbox, all we have to do now is drop it back
into the Mighty Dodge. And as you can see, it's starting to really come together. So that's going to be the end of the episode. So you make sure you hit like and subscribe down here, because coming up next, we're going to not only put the engine back in, we're going to do a whole heap of stuff to get it just that little bit closer to where it needs to be, which is out there on the road.